Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. May I request you all to settle down? May I invite on stage Ambassador Meera Shankar, India's former ambassador to the United States of America, Ambassador Javed Ashraf, India's former ambassador to France, and Ambassador Ajay Bisaria, India's former High Commissioner to Pakistan. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a very, very interesting session given what's happening around the world and India in this situation. But before we start this session, I want to, for a moment, play out what External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar, what he'd said about a year ago, 10 months ago, 2024, before Donald Trump's inauguration in January. This is something that he said in November. Listen in.
How do you see the US presidential election outcome impacting Indo-US ties, especially given Prime Minister Modi's strong personal rapport with President-elect Trump?
What do you mean specially given? I mean, we have it taken care of. So, I mean, you know, the Prime Minister was among the first 3 calls, I think, that President Trump took. I know today a lot of countries are nervous about the US, okay? Let's be honest about it. We are not one of them.
A lot of countries are nervous about Donald Trump. We are not one of them. Did we misread the situation, Ambassador?
Well, I think there were quite a few people in India who actually welcomed President Trump as the United States president because during his first term, he was seen as having tougher policies on Pakistan, on China, and therefore his relationship with India was seen as something special. And they were expecting that perhaps there will be a replication of Trump's first term in his second term. But you will remember that on your show, prior to the elections, I had cautioned about the consequences of a Trump presidency because of the agenda which he was pushing, which was anti-immigration with a racist undertone, at least in some of his MAGA supporters, and high tariffs, you know, because he felt that the US had been taken advantage of by other countries, and a kind of unsettled approach between foes and friends. A fascination for striking deals with his foes in particular, as you recall, during his first term with North Korea. And now we are facing the consequences.
So the writing was on the wall. Were we refusing to read it, Ambassador Ashraf, in your view?
Well, Gaurav, I think, first of all, even in the first term of President Trump, there were quite clear signals of his predilections. Trade was, of course, one of them. But then he also had this wonderful meetings with then Prime Minister Imran Khan. He had this proclivity towards resolving the Kashmir issue even then. He spoke about the nuclear flashpoint in South Asia even then. So some of those tendencies, and by the way, there was a lot of pressure on account of S-400 purchases from Russia. The CAATSA sanctions, and they gave us a one-time waiver, expected us not to continue with purchases. Anyway, by the time all of these issues were resolved, he was, of course, taken in by the fact that he self-invited himself to Houston. Then he, of course, was very bright-eyed about 100,000 people welcoming him in Ahmedabad. But again, that was a superficial bit. All of those things have been amplified multiple times. And the reason for this is this. The first term, he still dealt with an establishment that was familiar in some sense with India and geopolitics. He's now surrounded himself by pure MAGA ideologues, except for maybe Marco Rubio. But then it is his close group of people, his family, the White House turned into a personal enterprise of profit. that is, in a sense, shaping policy. And I do see everyone else trying to pick the cue and not be blindsided. But Gaurav, I think we miss on something deeper. I don't think that it is just Trump. There is a structural problem that we need to understand in order to right-size the India-US relations. Because over the past 4 or 5 years, we've conveyed the impression of an overinvestment of a strategic bet in one relationship, largely to the exclusion of others, to make it the cornerstone of our security architecture. And it led to a sort of a circular causality in our problems with China, neglect of Russia, a complete, almost benign attitude of disdain towards Europe, and of course completely ignoring our own immediate neighborhood. The structural problems are as follows. One, the United States deals with issues sequentially and linearly. They don't deal with it in a complex way which they should. So you'll always deal with it. The second problem is that India-US relationship was cast or transformed over the past 25 years in a different geopolitical order. When Russia-US relations weren't as difficult as they are today, China wasn't the big power that it is today, that the Western alliance was still holding together, which it is no longer holding together, but that geopolitical space is shrinking. Second, India-US relationship was a sui generis relationship. It was predicated on the belief that there will be tensions and limitations in a unipolar United States with neat dichotomy between allies and adversaries, and India, which is strategically autonomous and inclined towards multipolarity. But because we had a vision of an international order in which we could both contribute, working together or independently, we could navigate through all our differences. Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, Russia, trade. There were continuous differences which we were able to navigate through. But that now is becoming more and more difficult to reconcile.
Okay.
And then, of course, there is the other problem which we now have to deal with. Of course, I spoke about the geopolitical space shrinking, is the US retreat from the global order that it itself created because it no longer finds that attractive or useful to it. And that has led to a series of other consequences, leading to what I call President Trump being a culmination, not an aberration, of a US tendencies which have begun in 2008 and have only accelerated now. And the consequences, you will see that in Indo-Pacific, but we'll elaborate on that a little later.
And today, when we look at these images, Ambassador Bisaria, of Asim Munir, Field Marshal Asim Munir, once again in the White House, details not yet out in public domain. In President Trump's first term, he accused Pakistan of siphoning off $33 billion and then being involved in the killing of Americans. And now he's calling Asim Munir a great guy.
Yes, exactly. So I would agree that Trump 2.0 is a completely different game compared to Trump 1.0. He governs more from the right. He's governed more by the MAGA ideologues and so on. And the Pakistan story is part of it. It's part of the transactionalism. Now, on Pakistan's part, it's gaming this United States attitude. And for Pakistan, the big picture story is that its foreign policy, apart from being having an element of wanting revisionism on Kashmir, is one of trying to remain relevant in different ways to its three godfathers globally, which is the US, China, and Saudi Arabia. And it does it in different shapes and forms and in varying degrees of success. But in the recent past, it has managed to persuade the United States, and that is the Pakistan army, as distinct from the civilians, that they have some use for Pakistan, or Pakistan could be of use. So you're right. In 2018, on the 1st of January, Trump had tweeted that all he got from Pakistan was lies and deceit, and after spending $33 billion on the Pakistan army in the previous 15 years. But now what they have been offered is a package of a series of transactions, which includes cryptocurrency, which includes critical minerals, which includes exploration rights on petroleum, but also includes some things relevant to CENTCOM of the United States, which is counterterrorism. Pakistan, in a drip way, keeps handing over some terrorists. And now the US is seeing some possibilities of basing rights in Pakistan, basing rights at Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan. So all this little package, along with the sweetener of we nominate you for the Nobel Prize, is what gets Asim Munir an audience. And the next time he tags along the civilian leader who he says will also be present for this meeting. And you notice yesterday there was no media because the Pakistanis don't like this to be kind of exposed on the media.
Okay. And when you look at what Donald Trump is doing to India, it's a triple whammy. It's not just these 25% additional tariffs, Ambassador Shankar. It's also the Chabahar port sanctions revocation in terms of the exemption that was given to India and the H-1B visas. So is this relationship now headed downhill for the rest of the Trump tenure, or are these negotiation levers that he's pushing to get a better deal?
I think we have to wait and see, but there are certain fundamental features of the right Republican outlook which Trump reflects in an enhanced degree, and that is that he does not see China as a geostrategic competitor. He sees it as an economic competitor. And as far as he's concerned, he sees every country as an economic competitor of the United States. So the prism within which the US used to view the India relationship and which helped us to navigate some of our differences, that is that in the Indo-Pacific, we have a convergent interest in managing the rise of China and shaping a more stable and peaceful Asian balance into the future. I think that perhaps may no longer apply in the way that it did. Therefore, he tends to look at India as just another country, a large one, and one to which there has been outsourcing of services. Now, this is one feature which we have to understand, that the US, which was initially the biggest promoter of globalization, free trade, open markets, free flow of investment, free flow of capital, though not free flow of labor, has turned, and the high tide of globalization is behind us. We have a more fractured universe, and this is because the working class, particularly the white working class in America, feels that they have been left behind by globalization because jobs have shifted outside the US. So manufacturing jobs to China, services jobs to India, and that therefore this is causing unemployment in the US, and that it is also exerting a downward pressure on US wages at the lower level, because if workers ask for an increase, they can be told, well, this is uneconomical. If you demand so much, we can just shut shop and go out. So there is this fundamental pressure from the grassroots. But if you look at the unemployment figures actually in the US over the last several years, they've been very low. You know, they've been less than 4%, which is, you know, during Biden's term, it was 3.7% or something. And even in Trump's first term, they were very low. But it's more the fact that wages have been flat in the United States. So that kind of cushion, because of the geostrategic perspective, I think is no longer there. But I wouldn't rule out as yet, as a diplomat, I'm always optimistic, even in the face of pessimism that somehow at the end of the day, some deals will be possible. But this fundamental shift, I think I'll add one more thing here, that if you see the readout of Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's call with his Chinese counterpart, he says, A, the US is not seeking a conflict with China. Fine. That even the Biden administration said. They want managed competition.
Okay.
2, he says that they are not seeking regime change in China. That's a new kind of assurance. And the third is that they are not seeking the strangulation of China. Very strong assurances given by the US, and of course a reversion to the term in the Asia-Pacific, not Indo-Pacific. So it gives you a pointer as to the direction that US policy could take, though their policies have not yet been shaped and crystallized in a formal way.
So, you know, in between, you're absolutely right. Sometimes they said Indo-Pacific, then Asia-Pacific. Recently, once again, use of term Indo-Pacific by them, and then Asia-Pacific once again. But Ambassador Ashraf, one, is India's importance going down in Donald Trump's eyes, that leverage against China no longer required? And as far as Europe is concerned, he wanted Europe to impose taxes on India and China. How do you see Europe's response, and how do you see the German ambassador saying uncertainty in America? He didn't say uncertainty in America. He said, come study and work in Germany. It's predictable, no additional visa fees, no H-1B issues and all of that. So is Europe that leverage for India?
First of all, let me just amplify what Ambassador Shankar was saying. Now, as she said, President Trump's approach to the world is economic, not geopolitical. He sees China's, he seems to be hurt by the economic consequences of China's rise, not the classical US foreign policy objective of preventing the rise of another hegemonic power. He never says those things. Or the need for the United States to underwrite an international liberal order against new powers that are rising. So goals are different. Strategy is very, very different. The classical US strategy against any competitor involves two different pillars. One is direct containment. That is, use of technology and trade as weapons to contain China's rise, or in the earlier case, it was the Soviet Union. The second is the use of allies and partners in creating a countervailing force around a peer competitor. In the case of President Trump, the second pillar of the strategy does not exist. For him, he will deal with China directly he will deal with every other relationship on perceived grievances and extractive possibilities. So you see the first two countries to get letters on tariffs were Korea and Japan, treaty allies for 70 plus years. Australia, they are reviewing the AUKUS and may want to extract even more money than 368 billion Australian dollars, which have already been committed. And so there is, therefore, a decline in the salience of partners. And that is why, one of the reasons why the tolerance for differences is shrinking. Because tolerance for differences was there in Biden administration because of the perception that there were mutual economic gains and security benefits, but also that there was a larger vision of an international order that they both subscribed to. All of that is gone for the time being. But also remember, there is going to be a diminution of US influence, if not of power, in the Indo-Pacific region because of the dismantling, first of all, of the idea of globalism and universalism to now nationalism, but second also that the instruments of US engagement, trade, technology, finance, aid, security commitments and guarantees, soft power, mobility, these were the instruments through which the United States exercised influence. If you start stripping or dismantling US engagement of those, then there will be this kind of a problem. And second, there is no guarantee that the United States will see security in the Asia-Pacific or the Indo-Pacific as a public good, which was the foundation of US engagement in the region. If it retreats to its traditional perception of Western periphery, which is the Pacific, then it creates an entirely new dynamics in the Asia-Pacific or Indo-Pacific, as we prefer to call it, which means you will see greater degree of hedging and accommodation between countries in the region. And you will see now, for example, when the United States walked out of TPP, what happened? TPP didn't die. Japan led it into creating a CPTPP, to which now UK is joined and EU aspires to join. So this is all these new kinds of forces that will come into play, which is a segue for me into your question about Europe, which is this, that Europe itself is buffeted by three powers: a predatory China, a hostile Russia, and now an US as a partner that has, frankly, in a sense, abandoned it, or has shown absolutely no sense of transatlantic partnership that it used to exist. So Europe internally is falling behind in terms of innovation and competitiveness, in terms of its economic power. It's a divided house within. There is a rise of politics of the right, even in Europe. So Europe needs to also re-examine itself. Okay. And therefore, it needs new patterns of alignment. And those new patterns of alignment will necessarily include India. So its approach to India-EU FTA has become even more flexible than the rigid position it had adopted before. And there is going to be now, as you can see, even in areas, when you look at Europe, don't just look at EU, look at countries within Europe. Yeah. And in a time of great fluidity in international relations, there is coalition building, but there is capacity building. And European countries, in particular France, is a great partner in capacity building.
I'll come to specifically France and especially on defense cooperation with India in just a moment.
Just one moment, I wanted to conclude with what Ajay said about Pakistan-US relations, which I've been following for a very long time. They were allies for 50 years, fought in the trenches together in Afghanistan. US and Pakistan are the architects of Islamist radicalism in the world. They created the sanctuaries together. It didn't end well for either of the two sides. There have been many U-turns, even from 2000 onwards. Every administration comes into office seduced by the charms of Pakistan, seduced also by some of the offers they make. But it almost invariably, it happened with Bush administration, happened with the Obama administration, and it will happen with the Trump administration also. There have been many U-turns, but it doesn't end well for either side. So I don't put too much hope on it. He's quite right that they're also looking at basing vis-a-vis China, because for the United States, there is only at the moment a Pacific frontier. They need a Western frontier also. And when they look at Central Asia, look at Afghanistan and Pakistan, they're hoping at some point to wean Pakistan away from China and create some basing rights.
Which then brings me to my next question, Ambassador Basaria, that how is Pakistan able to, if I may use your terminology, seduce both China and America, to an extent Saudi Arabia? Is Pakistan playing the game better?
I would argue that Pakistan's primary godfather is China. And Pakistan has requested China for the space to play these games with the US and with Saudi Arabia. For the US, for its global reach, and with Saudi Arabia in the West Asian theater. And, it's nothing new. Pakistan has done it. The US relationship started in the 1950s, the China relationship in the 60s, the Saudi Arabia relationship in the 70s. It's just that they squandered a lot of it with bad policy somewhere in the middle, and the geopolitics changed. The moment the US left Afghanistan, the Biden administration said we don't have much use for them. But now, in a strategic sense, CENTCOM finds use for Pakistan and then persuades the White House, which finds use in these transactions, to go ahead with these deals. So I think I would agree with Javed that this won't end well. Trump started off with that tweet in 2018, and I think in a short while you might see another tweet about how he's been disappointed. But at this point of time, they're trying to play these transactions, and beyond a point, Pakistan won't be able to balance the Chinese and US interests. And I think no doubt about the fact, we've seen this with Op Sindoor, that China is the central partner. We saw the collusive battlefield. We see Pakistan trying to upgrade its weaponry from China to the JF-35s and so on. So I think it's playing this game with Chinese blessings and will continue to do so.
When you speak of defense hardware with China, when, India was let down by the United States of America or the Western Bloc after our Pokhran tests, and the entire Sea King and Sea Harrier fleet of the Indian Navy was grounded. And yet we are going in for GE 404 engines and then the 414 engines with the United States of America. You've been our ambassador to France. Would Safran France have been a better deal? Are we putting all our eggs in the American basket, and with Trump there, that's not a very good idea?
Gaurav, I spent about 14, 15 years dealing with the United States, and I sort of dive deep into US export control laws during the NSSP and the nuclear deal. I think the US export control laws are extremely complex. I would never put our core combat system in the US hands, because between the administration and the US Congress, they can play games in different ways. We need to be fully cognizant and aware of US export control histories, not just for themselves, but with some of their partners. They can exercise pressure even on countries like Germany. So you've got two countries, Russia and France, that have acted with great strategic autonomy. France was the one country. Remember, they gave us, or they taught us how to build the engine for our rockets. The Viking became the Vikas. Manufacturing TOT is a crutch that keeps you dependent forever. And in the case of the United States, first of all, G404 is an old engine. It has an old architecture, old metallurgy, and in any case, you're not getting the 20% that you need desperately, which is the hot section. Because, that is where the metallurgy is the most complex, and those turbine blades that are single crystal blade casting, they're not going to let you have it. The French offer in 2016, and for the LCA Mark 1A, was to build an India-France engine based on M88, which powers the Rafale, and with 100% TOT. 100% TOT on A, design. You need to sit on the drawing board and start doing the design, not simply get like an IKEA furniture where you're given a manual of how to put it together, because that doesn't teach you how to make that furniture. So 100% TOT on design, development, industrialization, maturation of the technology, qualification and certification.
They were willing to give it.
It's in writing, and it was to be a sovereign IP with full rights for export controls and to export to whoever we wanted. We wouldn't have needed license from France. And it's the same offer. Now, then the argument was that the LCA Mark 1A was designed with GE 404 in mind, and therefore it would be difficult. I think as long as the engine can be form-fitted, that does not require a structural change in the combat aircraft, you can work around some of the air intake issues. You can work around some of the software that you can do it. And the same applies, I would say, for G414. Okay. How can you power a future aircraft with an engine that has been there for a long time, and therefore the offer that they have made for the AMCA engine. Now, once you know how to do the core technologies,
yes,
then it doesn't matter whether it's 110K and 120, 130, or it is a lower thrust 98 in 94K.
Okay.
You know how to develop, you know how to design, and you can do the manufacturing of the turbine blades, you can do
And
the
then you're not
metallurgy.
dependent just on the United States of America.
No, and more important, you develop sovereign capacities
Yes.
for a system that is even more difficult to master sometimes than rocket engine. The reason is because that engine goes through thousands and thousands of cycles of going up to 1800 degrees Celsius, then cooling down, and the turbine blades moving at a great speed. So a strategic autonomy of India requires, in a fluid situation, a diversified portfolio. In the city of finance, we know that the market is volatile.
Yes.
You need a diversified portfolio.
So
you need
therefore,
diversified portfolio
in a
relationship.
situation like this, Ambassador Shankar, should we be looking forward to Donald Trump coming to India this year for a Quad summit, or is that overrated? If the relationship is not as much in his interest, then why should it be of more interest to us?
Well, let me put it this way, that for India, the US is still the largest market. We export $87 billion worth of goods and a fair amount of software, whereas we have a surplus of, the US says 45 billion, we say $41 billion in goods. In services, the US has a small surplus of 100 million with India. So services trade is broadly balanced. All these H-1Bs and whatever notwithstanding, the US actually always suppresses this fact that the services trade is balanced, and that if we were to add the royalty payments by Indian companies for technology use from the US, if we were to add the IPR payments by Indian firms for use of technology, etc., then you might find actually, and the educational fees that Indian students pay, then you might find that the US trade surplus is around $20–30 billion with India in services. But for India, given that we are not a very large exporter to the world, you know, to Russia we export $4 billion worth of goods. Even though our trade has gone up to over 60 billion, it's mainly energy imports from Russia by India. The same is true with China, where we have a $100 billion trade deficit with China, and we exported only $14 billion worth of goods to China. So neither of those countries is in a position to step in and provide an alternative to the US. Europe, perhaps, but I think Europe still has to reach a stage where they exert full strategic autonomy from the US. So partly they still tend to take signals from the US. And President Trump has been pushing, saying delay the FTA unless India stops Russian oil imports. So for India, diversification of relations, trade and economic relations, including with the Middle East, where we could export more, including Africa, including Latin America, including concluding all the FTAs that we have, shoring up our short-term, our export segments which are going to be hit by the tariffs,
right,
like textiles, garments, leather, marine products, gems and jewelry. I think we need to shore them up to see if there is space and time to have a deal. And I think rationalizing our trade policies logistically, the soft regulatory framework to make it easy to trade with the rest of the world. I think that's important. In defense, I would agree with Javed that certainly offensive systems, I think we cannot rely upon the US as a partner because they have a history of putting ex post facto sanctions, even something which they have cleared. If there is something they don't like, the Congress will say, impose tariffs or put sanctions or something, and then you are stuck. Or they can freeze the export of spare parts.
Yes,
so
and we have suffered, sadly.
Yes, entire system will be grounded. I think we need to actually step up our own defense manufacturing base as quickly as possible. That is the key in as many sectors as possible, and work with partners who are willing to transfer technology to you.
I will
and
yeah.
therefore look not just at the immediate cost of a product, but the life cycle cost of the product. And finally, look at partners who are willing to go by, predictability in the relationship and not use defense trade for other purposes.
Absolutely. And I will let that be the last word on this part of the show. For joining me here for this very riveting discussion, Ambassador Shankar, Ambassador Ashraf, and Ambassador Bisaria, as always, many thanks.